I woke up lying on wooden planks, and the first thing I felt was a salty, burning sensation in my throat. The sun was directly overhead, and the surface of the planks was about 60 degrees. I was lying face down, with the rough wood, smelling of resin and rot, pressing against my cheek. I didn't get up abruptly because sudden movements in a critical situation kill faster than starvation. I rolled over slowly, sat up, and took stock of my body in 10 seconds. My arms were intact, my legs were intact, and my head was working, and that was already more than nothing. The raft beneath me was 4 by 3 meters and consisted of uneven planks tied together with rope. I looked around in a circle and saw only the horizon on all 4 sides and no land. In the left corner of the raft lay a pile of debris that the waves had carried in and washed up against the edge. I got down on my knees and crawled over to that pile because trash is a resource, not waste. A plastic bottle without a cap, a piece of fishing net, and a rusty metal rod. The rod was 80 centimeters long and quite heavy, and the first idea immediately clicked in my head. I picked up the rod and felt its balance, realizing that it would make a good spearhead. The system activated on its own, and a voice appeared in my head as if someone had turned on a speaker inside my skull. The voice was neutral and slightly mocking, and it informed me that I was in Survival Zone Level 1. The system explained that it would track my actions and award points for each skill. Skill points: crafting 0 out of 100, hunting 0 out of 100, building 0 out of 100, and survival 1 out of 100. 1 point just for waking up and standing. The system counted that as a basic display of the will to live. I smiled quietly because I'd seen systems like this 1,000 times in games and knew how they worked from the inside. 7 years of survival games and hundreds of hours in Ark, Stranded Deep, and Raft had taught me one rule. The rule was simple. The first 2 hours determine everything, and whoever loses momentum at the start loses. I wasn't going to lose, because now it wasn't a screen, but real salt water beneath the planks. I picked up a stick and began sharpening its end against the rough edge of the hardest plank on the raft. The motion was monotonous, and I counted the strikes in my head, stopping at 200 and checking the result. The end of the pole wasn't sharp enough, so I continued until I reached 350 strikes. A system notification beeped in my head and reported, crafting +3, and now the stat was 3 out of 100. I set the spear aside and moved on to the fishing net because the water around me was clear and the fish were visible. The net was torn, but I tore off a 2-meter section of intact fabric by hand and tied it to the edge of the raft. I tied nautical knots because in Raft on PC, I'd spent 3 hours studying knots just for an achievement. That achievement was worthless in the game, but now those 3 hours had turned into a real skill in my real hands. I lowered the net into the water, secured it, and sat down to wait. Within the first 5 minutes, 2 small fish had swum into it. The system reported survival +2 and hunting +1, and my overall survival rating was now 3 out of 100. I killed the fish quickly and without unnecessary movements because the prolonged agony of the victim drains your energy. I gutted the first fish against the edge of the board and ate it raw because there was no fire and no other choice. The taste was sharp and salty and a little bitter, but protein is protein, and my body accepted it without protest. The sun began to set, and the shadow of my body lengthened, and I realized I had 2 hours of daylight left. 2 hours is a lot if you know what to do, and not much if you spend them panicking. I didn't panic because panic is a luxury I couldn't afford, neither in the game nor here. I started reinforcing the edge of the raft because there would be waves at night, and falling into the water in the dark meant death. I cut the ropes from the net into strips and began wrapping them around the planks along the perimeter, creating a low railing. My fingers worked automatically, and at the same time I was thinking about what I would need first thing tomorrow. Tomorrow I'd need a roof to keep out the sun, a rainwater collection system, and an improved spear for hunting large fish. The sharks were already there. I'd seen a dark fin 100 meters to the west 3 times in the last hour. The system saw it too and added a note in my head. Class B threat detected. Distance 100 meters. I smiled quietly again because the shark in Raft was the first boss, and I'd killed it on the 3rd day of the game. They thought the shark was the end, and they didn't know that a shark is just skin and teeth and fat and material. The platform was ready by sunset, and I lay on my back and watched the stars appear one by one. The system summed up the first day, and the voice sounded in my head evenly and without emotion, like a good interface. Day's summary: crafting 3, hunting 4, building 2, survival 6, and overall survival level rose to 2. I closed my eyes and told myself silently that tomorrow would bring a spear, and water, and the beginning of something greater. The raft rocked, and the ocean breathed beneath it, and I was alive, and that was enough to keep going. I woke up before dawn because the ocean had changed its sound, and that always means something. The raft was rocking differently, and the rhythm of the waves had grown shorter, so I sat up, opened my eyes, and saw a gray sky without stars. The system activated immediately and reported that the water temperature was 24 degrees and the wind was 12 kilometers per hour. The fin was already 40 meters away and moving slowly in a circle, which meant the shark was studying the raft. I grabbed the spear, stood up, felt the planks flexing under my feet, and checked my balance. In Raft, the shark had attacked the raft from below and gnawed at the planks, and the mechanics here were most likely the same. I lay on my stomach, leaned over the edge, looked under the raft, and saw a dark shadow 2 meters below the water. The shark was about 2 meters long, moving slowly, and hadn't yet decided to attack. The system added a tag: tiger shark, weight approximately 90 kilograms, and status, patrolling. I smiled quietly because 90 kilograms isn't just a threat, it's fat and skin and teeth and meat. They thought that a predator always wins against a human in the water, and they didn't know that I had a spear and a plan. The shark accelerated and struck the board from below. The raft jerked, and I held onto the side with my left hand. The blow was strong. One board cracked, and water began to seep through the crack in a thin stream. I didn't wait for a second strike, because a second strike is always more accurate than the first, no matter the opponent. I aimed at the spot where the shadow was closest to the surface, and thrust the spear straight down. The shaft entered the water, and I felt resistance. I jerked it sideways, and the shark jerked and swam off to the side. There was no blood visible at first, but the water clouded slightly to the left, which meant the hit was real. The system beeped. Hunt +5, damage dealt, target damaged, and distance increasing. The shark swam 60 meters away and stopped, and I saw its fin motionless on the water's surface. An injured opponent who has stopped is an opponent who is either dying or gathering strength. I waited 4 minutes, counting the seconds in my head, and the fin didn't move, then slowly drifted sideways. The shark rolled onto its side, and that was the end of it. I knew it because the body had lost its direction of movement. I jumped into the water without hesitation, because any delay meant the carcass would be carried away by the current forever. The water was warm and salty, and I swam the crawl toward the carcass, reaching it in 40 seconds and grabbing the fin with my hand. Dragging a 2-meter shark to the raft alone was a task bordering on the impossible, and I knew that beforehand. I dragged it sideways, resting every 10 strokes, and reached the raft in 8 minutes. My arms were burning. It was impossible to haul the carcass completely onto the raft, so I tied it to the side with a rope from the net. The system reported, "Hunt 9 of 100," and the crafting task was activated, with new recipes from shark materials now available. I began butchering right at the side of the raft, and my knife was a sharpened edge of a metal scrap from the trash pile. Shark skin dulls any tool quickly, so I worked slowly and methodically, taking my time. The first thing I cut out was the liver, because shark liver is concentrated fat, calories, and vitamins. The liver weighed about 3 kilograms, and I set it aside on the raft and covered it with a piece of net to protect it from the sun. Then I cut strips of meat and laid them out on boards to dry, because the sun was already high in the sky. I carefully knocked out the teeth and collected 23 of them. They were hard, sharp, and very useful. The system added, crafting +4 and new components obtained, and the shark teeth unlock the blueprint for an improved spear. I peeled off the skin in 2 large pieces. It was as rough as sandpaper, and that was exactly what I needed. Shark skin is a natural abrasive, and with it I'll be able to sharpen my teeth and work the wood more precisely. By noon, all that was left of the shark was useless scraps. so I cut the rope and let the remains go. The system tallied the interim results, and the voice sounded steady. Hunting 12, crafting 9, and survival 11. I ate a piece of raw liver. The taste was heavy and rich, and my body accepted the fat with palpable relief. Then I set to work on the cracked plank because a hole in the raft is a priority above all else. I plugged the gap with strips of shark skin hammered into the crack because the skin swells in water and becomes denser. The repair took 40 minutes, and the raft was watertight again. I stood up and examined the structure with fresh eyes. The raft held, but it was weak, and the next shark or a serious wave could tear it apart in minutes. I began making an improved spear from a rod and shark teeth, which I tied to the end with strips of leather. 3 teeth fit into the grooves I'd cut into the metal, forming a trident, and that was a whole different story. The system registered the creation and displayed a new tag: Improved Spear, damage plus 40%. By evening, I had meat for 3 days. Fat, abrasive, an improved weapon, and the hole patched up. I lay down and watched the sunset. The sky was orange and dark red, and clouds were gathering somewhere in the west. Rain is water, and water is life. But I didn't yet have a system for collecting it, and that was my next task. The system closed out the day and listed the stats: crafting 13, hunting 12, construction 2, and survival 14. My level rose to 3, and the system added a single phrase that didn't surprise me but confirmed the course. The phrase went like this: the survivor demonstrates unconventional use of available resources, and this is noted. I closed my eyes, and the clouds in the west were growing darker, and I already knew how I would face the rain in the morning. The clouds arrived sooner than I expected, and the sky turned black even before dawn, and the wind picked up to 25 kilometers per hour. I was already awake because the raft had started rocking differently, and my body sensed the change before my mind did. The system confirmed: a Category 1 storm with expected rainfall of 40 to 60 millimeters, starting in 20 minutes. 20 minutes isn't much, but it's enough if you know what to build and don't waste time thinking. I took a plastic bottle, cut it lengthwise with a shark tooth, and unfolded it into a flat, funnel-shaped sheet. Then I took a piece of fishing net and stretched it between 2 vertical poles to form a frame. I stuck the poles between the raft's planks and secured them with ropes, and the structure was up in 4 minutes. I tied the plastic sheet to the frame with the corner pointing down and placed the bottomless bottle under the lower corner like a cup. The system scanned the structure, paused for about 3 seconds, and then gave it a construction rating of +3. The rain hit suddenly and horizontally, and for the first few seconds it was just a wall of water and a roar against the planks. I lay flat and clung to the side because the raft was rocking, and it was impossible to stand without risking a fall. The waves grew higher, and the raft's bow dipped, with water rolling over the boards and flowing back out. My collection system was working, and I could see the water running down the plastic and dripping into the bottle at the angle of the frame. The accumulation was slow because the structure was small, but 200 milliliters had collected in the first 10 minutes. I looked at the water in the bottle and thought about how the first rain collector and raft had also been ineffective. In the game, you simply built more collectors, and the problem was solved by scale. Here, the logic was the same. I needed more collection area, and the shark skin was large enough and impermeable enough. I crawled over to the supplies and pulled out a large piece of shark skin. It was about 1 meter by half a meter in area. Tying it to the frame in the storm was more difficult. My hands kept slipping, and the wind tore the skin from my fingers twice. On the 3rd try, I lay down on the skin with my whole body, tied the corners simultaneously, and secured the structure. The collection area quadrupled, and the flow into the bottle became visible and continuous rather than just a trickle. The system registered the improvement and showed a +2 in craft and a +4 in construction, which was nice. The storm lasted 40 minutes, and during that time I collected about 2 liters of water in the bottle and the plastic sheet. 2 liters is the daily survival requirement, and for the first time since waking up, I had enough water for a full day. I took my first sip. The water was fresh and slightly sour from the plastic, and it was the best taste I'd had in 2 days. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, and the sky cleared and the waves began to calm down within 20 minutes. I stood up and inspected the raft and saw that one rope on the side had snapped and 2 planks had come apart by a centimeter. The repair took 15 minutes, and I used the last strips of shark skin to seal the gap. The system reported that the supply of shark materials was running low, and there was only enough skin left for one small repair. I made a mental note. The next shark is a priority, and the hunt is planned for this afternoon. The sun came out and began to dry the planks, and the meat on the planks was drying too. The smell was sharp and salty. I checked the dried meat, and it was half done. One more day of sun would make it ready. Then, I tackled a task I'd been putting off because it required resources I didn't have before. I needed a roof because the sun kills more slowly than sharks, but just as surely and just as inevitably. After 2 days of direct sun, the skin on my shoulders was already burning, and my neck was red, and that was the beginning of the problem. I sorted through all the trash that had accumulated over the past 2 days, and methodically found the useful items among the useless ones. A piece of blue polyethylene, about 1 meter by 1 meter, had washed up against the hull during the storm, and it was a stroke of luck. The system flagged the find as a rare resource and added, "Canopy component detected. Blueprint available." I smiled quietly because the ocean itself had brought me what I needed, and this happened all the time in games. They thought the ocean was just a threat, and they didn't know that the ocean was also a warehouse with free delivery. 4 poles formed the frame, and the plastic sheeting went over the top. I tied it at an angle to allow water to drain. The canopy covered 1/3 of the raft and provided 2 square meters of shade. And this was a place to sleep and rest. The system recognized the structure and awarded +6 to construction, raising my construction level to 11 out of 100. It was 15 degrees cooler under the canopy, and I lay down in the shade and felt my body for it. I ate a piece of raw meat, washed it down with water, and thought about how the base camp was beginning to take shape. There is water, there is food, there is shelter, and there are weapons. And with that, the 4 basic pillars of survival are covered. The system summed up the 3rd day, and the voice was just as steady, but a new inflection had appeared in it. Summary: Crafting 17, Hunting 12, Construction 11, and Survival 19. The overall level had risen to 4 out of 10. The system added a message I hadn't expected, and it appeared in my mind as a separate line after a pause. The message said that at level 5, a map of the region would unlock, and the distance to the nearest land would become visible. I looked at the horizon and calculated in my head how much I needed to reach level 5, and the answer was about 20 points. 20 points is 1 or 2 days of active work if the pace doesn't drop, and I wasn't planning on slowing down. The sun was setting and I lay under the canopy, listening to the raft creak on the waves and thinking about the map. I woke up with a clear plan because while my body rested at night, my mind kept calculating. I needed 20 points to reach level 5, and hunting yielded the most points per unit of time spent. The system confirmed the calculation and displayed an efficiency table that I hadn't asked for, but accepted as useful. Hunting yielded an average of 4 to 6 points per large target, crafting yielded 2 to 3, and construction yielded 3 to 5 per structure. The fastest route to the map went through the water and past the shark, and I knew that even last night as I was falling asleep. I got up and checked the spear. The teeth were firmly attached, the tip was sharp, and the construction had no play. Then I checked the water. There were 800 milliliters left in the bottle, which was enough for half a day of hunting. The sun was just rising, and the water was calm and clear. I could see the bottom down to a depth of about 8 meters. There was no sign of the shark, but that didn't mean it wasn't there, because tiger sharks patrol a wide area. I decided to actively lure the shark because waiting passively was a waste of time, and time was precious. I took a piece of dried meat and lowered it into the water on a rope as bait, then waited at the side of the raft with my spear. The system noted the action and added +1 to my hunting score for the bait tactic, a small but fair point. I had to wait 22 minutes, counting them in my head and never taking my eyes off the water beneath the raft. The shark came from the north, and it was larger than the first one. The system estimated its weight at 130 kilograms. I smiled quietly, because 130 kilograms meant more materials, more points, and a better result. The shark approached the bait slowly. It was a cautious predator, not a hungry one, and that changed my tactics. A cautious predator doesn't strike immediately. It circles, checks, and waits for the right moment, and I knew this pattern. In games, cautious I always had one weakness. It reacted to unexpected movement faster than to static objects. I jerked the line with the bait upward sharply, and the shark reacted instinctively, lunging toward the surface after its prey. The moment its snout broke the surface half a meter below, I struck with the spear right behind its left eye. The blow was vertical and sharp, and I put my full body weight into it, feeling the teeth sink deep. The shark thrashed and lunged to the side, and the spear was wrenched from my hands. I nearly flew overboard after it. I grabbed the gunwale with my right hand and watched as the spear stuck out of the shark's head and it disappeared into the depths. The system issued an alert. Weapon lost, target critically wounded, and probability of target death 87%. 87% isn't 100, and the shark, with a spear in its head, could swim away and carry off my only weapon forever. I didn't think for more than a second and jumped into the water because the calculation was simple and the alternative was worse. The water hit me with a cold shock, and I opened my eyes underwater and saw the shark 5 meters below. It was slowing down and moving erratically, and the spear was sticking out of its head. And that was exactly what I needed to see. I dove down and grabbed the shark's tail with both hands. It jerked, but its strength was already fading fast. I dragged it toward the surface. My lungs were burning, and I counted the seconds, surfacing at the 15-second mark with the tail in my hands. The shark was still alive but barely moving, and I held the tail with one hand while reaching for the spear in its head with the other. I pulled the spear out with a sharp motion, and the shark twitched one last time before going still, and I tied it to the side of the boat. The system issued a series of notifications, one after another, and the voice sounded hurried, as if the system was surprised too. Hunting +8, and crafting +2 for weapon repair, and survival +3 for diving, for a total of +13. I climbed onto the raft, lay on my back, and looked up at the sky, breathing deeply as my heart raced at around 160 beats per minute. A minute's rest, and then I stood up and started butchering because 130 kilograms is a lot of work in the heat. The butchering took an hour and a half, and I worked methodically, sorting the materials by priority of use. The liver weighed 4 kilograms. There were 3 large pieces of hide, and I counted 31 teeth. The system scanned my supplies and unlocked 2 new schematics that had previously been unavailable due to a lack of materials. The first schematic was called a fishing hook and required 2 teeth and a piece of rope. It was for passive fishing. The second schematic was called a reinforced gunwale and required leather and wooden struts. It provided protection from waves. I made 3 hooks right away because passive fishing is points without effort, and that's always a good deal. The hooks were lowered into the water on ropes tied to the side of the boat, and the system awarded a +4 craft bonus for the series. Then I worked on the reinforced side, which took another hour, and the result was immediately visible and tangible. The side now held firmly and didn't wobble, and the shark strike as powerful as the first one wouldn't split the planks anymore. The system awarded construction +7, then showed construction at 18 out of 100, which was a new high. By midday, one of the hooks was tugging, and I pulled up a fish weighing about a kilogram, an effortless bonus. The system added +2 to hunting, and I realized that having 3 hooks in the water was a constant passive source of points. The sun had passed its zenith, so I sat under the awning and calculated the final results after the morning hunt and work. The total score after today's activities added up to a net gain of 26 survival points, which was above plan. The system processed the data with a 4-second pause, and then displayed the message I've been waiting for since day 1. Level 5 has been reached, the region map has been unlocked, and the system is beginning to build a map based on the data. The map appeared in my mind as an overlay on top of my real vision. It was schematic but legible. The raft was a dot in the center, surrounded by the ocean, and 340 kilometers to the northeast was a landmark. I looked at that landmark, and the 340 kilometers ahead, on a raft without a motor, drifting at a speed of 2 to 3 kilometers per hour. The calculation put the drift time at 5 to 7 days if the wind was favorable, and that was realistic and achievable. But drifting is passive movement, and passive movement depends on the wind, and the wind doesn't ask for your opinion. I needed to control the course, and control means a sail, and a sail is the next task after the map. The system added the final line to the day's summary, and the voice sounded just as calm, but the information was significant. Result: crafting 23, hunting 22, construction 18, survival 26, level 5, and map activated. I looked to the northeast, and there was the usual horizon, water, and sky, but now I knew there was land beyond the horizon. A sail isn't just a piece of cloth on a pole, and I knew this because in Raft, the wrong sail would turn the raft sideways. Sideways to the waves means capsizing, and capsizing in the open ocean means the end, and I wasn't going to end it here. The system unlocked a sail design at level 5, and the design required a large sail, 2 masts, and a steering system. I had one large piece of fabric, and it was the blue polyethylene under the canopy, so the choice was obvious and painful. I looked at the canopy for 3 seconds and thought about how a roof from the sun is comfort, but moving toward land is survival. The canopy became a sail, and I took it apart methodically and folded the polyethylene carefully so as not to tear the material. The masts required wood, and I had no wood except for the raft's planks, and I couldn't touch the planks yet. I examined everything on the raft and found 2 metal rods in a pile of trash that I hadn't used before. Rod number 1 was 120 centimeters long, and rod number 2 was 90 centimeters long, and both were fairly stiff. The system scanned the rods and displayed the load calculation. Both rods could withstand winds up to 30 kilometers per hour. 30 kilometers per hour is enough for cruising speed and not enough for a storm, but a storm is a separate issue. I stuck the long pole vertically between the center boards and secured it with ropes crisscrossed over each other. I tightened the knots as much as possible and checked each one 3 times because a mast that falls is a mast that kills. I tied the second pole horizontally to the top of the first one, creating a T-shaped frame for the sail. I tied the polyethylene to the horizontal pole at the top and the 2 lower corners with ropes that had some extra length. That extra length provided control. By pulling on the left rope, I turned the sail to the left, which changed the course. The system evaluated the design and gave it a construction score of +9 and a craft score of +5, which was a good result. I raised the sail. The wind was light, about 8 kilometers per hour, and the polyethylene filled sluggishly and uncertainly. The raft rocked and began to turn slowly, so I pulled the right rope and corrected the direction. The system displayed the course and direction of travel, and the current speed was 1.2 kilometers per hour heading northeast. 1.2 was less than the drift, which meant the wind was now partially working against me, and I had to wait. I didn't get angry at the wind because getting angry at the wind is a waste of energy, of which I had a limited amount. I secured the steering ropes and turned to other tasks because waiting for the wind while standing still is a waste. The hooks brought in 2 fish that morning, and I gutted them. The meat went out to dry, and the innards went to serve as new bait. The system added +3 to hunting, and the passive income was working steadily, exactly as I had planned. Then I tackled a task that had been brewing for 2 days and required materials that were finally available. I needed more raft space because 4 by 3 meters is survival, not growth. In Raft, expanding the raft is the first law of progress, and here that law worked just as well, without exception. I completely dismantled the trash pile and retrieved 3 planks that had washed up against the raft during the storm. The planks were of different lengths and thicknesses, but all 3 were sturdy enough for decking. I tied them to the raft's starboard side, extending it by 60 centimeters, and gained an additional platform. The platform was narrow and not very sturdy, but it provided a place to dry meat separately from the living area. The system recognized the expansion, displayed a construction bonus of +6, and updated the raft's parameters in the data. The raft was now 4 by 3.6 meters, and its area had increased by 20%. And this was just the beginning, not the end result. The wind picked up after noon, and the system showed 15 kilometers per hour. The sail filled out properly. The raft jerked and began to move more confidently, and the speed increased to 2.8 kilometers per hour, heading northeast. I took the steering ropes and began to adjust the course with small movements, feeling out the optimal angle. The optimal angle of the sail to the wind is neither directly against it nor directly downwind, but about 45 degrees to the course. This is called a beam reach, and I knew this term from sailing simulators and was now applying it in practice. At a 45-degree angle, the speed increased to 3.4 kilometers per hour, and the system confirmed that the course was accurate. 340 kilometers at a speed of 3.4, and taking into account the nighttime drop in wind, would take about 4.5 days. 4.5 days is a concrete figure, and a concrete figure is a plan, and a plan is control over the situation. I smiled quietly because 3 days ago I had a raft and a rusty rod, and now I had a course and a timeline. They thought the ocean was chaos, and they didn't know that any chaos has parameters, and parameters can be calculated. The sun began to set, and without a canopy the heat was fading faster, and that was the only upside to losing the roof. I ate some dried meat and washed it down with water. I had 600 milliliters of water left, which was the yellow supply level. The system flagged water as a priority and added a forecast. The next rain was expected in 18 to 24 hours. 18 hours was manageable, and 600 milliliters was the minimum but enough, so I rationed it out over time. 200 milliliters now, 200 in the morning, and 200 before the rain. It was a strict but doable plan. At night, the wind stayed at 10 kilometers per hour. The sail worked, and the raft moved slowly but steadily. The system updated my position every hour, and by dawn, the map showed that I had traveled 28 kilometers to the northeast. 28 kilometers is the first real progress toward land, and the number on the map changed from 340 to 312 kilometers. The system closed out the day and showed the results. The voice was calm, but the data spoke for itself without comment. Summary: Craft 28, Hunting 25, Construction 33, Survival 31, Level 5, and 312 kilometers to land. I looked at the sail rustling in the darkness and thought about how the raft had become something more than just a raft. Dawn came with fog, and visibility dropped to 50 meters. The ocean turned gray and flat. The sail was working at half strength because the wind is always weaker in fog, and the speed dropped to 1.8 kilometers per hour. The system showed the forecast. The fog was supposed to clear by noon, and the wind was supposed to return after that. I drank 200 milliliters of water and felt my throat thank me for it. My supply dropped to 400 milliliters. The system predicted rain in 12 to 18 hours, so I decided not to waste the morning waiting, but to use the fog as a tool. Fog isn't just poor visibility, it's also humidity. So I stretched the shark skin horizontally over the raft. The skin collected condensation, and the droplets flowed toward the center, where I placed a plastic sheet like a funnel. In 2 hours of fog, I collected 150 milliliters. It was slow, but it came from the air and without rain. The system awarded me a +2 bonus for creative use of materials, and I accepted that as a fair assessment. Then the fog began to reveal something interesting, and at first I mistook it for the play of light on the water. 20 meters off the port side in the fog was a dark spot, and it wasn't moving like a wave or a fish. I grabbed my spear and pulled the raft closer, using a rope wound around my arm, and the spot took shape as an object. It was a trash island, not large but real, and it consisted of plastic, ropes, and wooden debris. The system scanned it and displayed its composition, and the data appeared in my mind as a list of usefulness in descending order. A wooden plank 180 centimeters long, a plastic container with a lid, and a nylon rope about 8 meters long. Then a metal object of indeterminate shape, 2 smaller planks, a piece of rubber, and styrofoam. I saw the styrofoam and immediately understood its value, because styrofoam means buoyancy, and buoyancy means surface area. I smiled quietly because the ocean was once again acting as a warehouse, and delivery was free and timely. I jumped into the water and swam toward the island, working quickly because the fog might lift and the island might disappear with it. I pushed a 180 centimeter wooden plank in front of me toward the raft. It was heavy but stayed afloat. I wound the rope around my shoulder. It was wet and slippery, but 8 meters of nylon is a huge treasure. I carried a plastic container in one hand. It was closed and there was something inside, which added to the intrigue. 3 trips took 20 minutes, and I hauled everything the system had flagged as useful onto the raft and caught my breath. The metal object turned out to be a bracket from some kind of structure, with 2 holes and a sharp corner. I turned it over in my hands. The sharp corner and the holes signaled possibilities I hadn't yet clearly articulated. Then I opened the plastic container, and inside was something that made me freeze for 3 full seconds. Inside were a tinder and flint wrapped in oiled cloth, and a small coil of copper wire. Fire was the only thing I was missing for a proper camp, and there it was, just lying in a plastic container. The system issued a notification, marked the find as a Class A event, and immediately added +10 to survival. I didn't wait and lit the fire immediately, because you have to test the skill right away, not save it for later. Tinder made from dry shark skin fibers and the spark from a flint. On the 3rd try, a fire appeared, and I accepted it. A small fire on a metal bracket that served as a brazier, and it was the first warmth I'd felt in 6 days. The system awarded me +6 craft for creating the fire and +4 survival, and these were pleasant but expected numbers. I placed the fish over the fire, and the smell of grilled fish was so sharp and so right that my stomach tightened. Boiled or grilled fish is protein that is absorbed 30% better than raw fish, and that's important for strength. While the fish was cooking, I worked on the foam and attached 2 large pieces under the extended platform on the starboard side. The platform stopped sagging under the weight and became more stable, which meant it could carry a heavier load. I split the nylon rope. 4 meters went toward reinforcing the mast, and I kept 4 meters as a spare. The mast, with its nylon rigging, became rigid and stopped flapping in gusts, which improved the sail's reliability. The system awarded +5 for rigging and +3 for crafting for the rope work, and that was fair. The fog cleared by noon. The wind returned, and our speed increased to 3.1 kilometers per hour heading northeast. Rain came in the middle of the day, and I was ready with my collection system. In 40 minutes, I collected 2.4 liters. 2.4 liters is 2 days' worth of normal consumption, and the yellow water level turned green, which was a relief. I covered the fire pit with a container during the rain, and the fire survived, which meant the ignition system was reliable. By evening, the raft had changed so much that I stopped and examined it as a whole, as if seeing it for the first time. A mast with a sail and a fire pit on a bracket, plus an extended platform with foam, a water supply, and dried meat. This was no longer a survival raft, it was a raft with infrastructure, and the difference between the two was fundamental. The system wrapped up the day and displayed the results, and the numbers reflected what I saw with my own eyes, without needing any additional words. Result: crafting 37, hunting 27, construction 41, survival 45, and my level had risen to 6 out of 10. There were 281 kilometers left to land, and the map showed that the land marker had become slightly larger and more distinct. Level 6 unlocked a new tab in the system, and I discovered it in the morning when I checked the map after breakfast. The tab was called Communication, and inside there was one active blueprint called Class 1 Signal Fire. The blueprint required an open fire, a reflector, and smoke, and the system estimated the signal's range at 15 kilometers. 15 kilometers isn't much, but it's the difference between an invisible raft and one that can be spotted from a ship. I read the diagram and thought about how, in games, a signal fire had always been a transition point to the next stage. A transition point meant the rules were changing and new variables were appearing that I couldn't control. New variables are people, and people are the most unpredictable variable in any survival system. I smiled quietly because I knew this rule and knew that meeting people required preparation in advance. But 281 kilometers on a raft is 4 days, and 4 days is plenty of time for unforeseen circumstances. A signal fire increased the odds, and increasing the odds was always the right decision, regardless of the risks. I made the reflector out of copper wire wound around a piece of shark skin, stretched tight like a drum. The surface turned out uneven, but shiny enough to reflect a sunbeam over a long distance. The system evaluated the reflector and rated it Craft +3, adding that its effectiveness was 60% of the design. 60% isn't the maximum, but it's a working tool, and a working tool is better than something that's perfect on paper. For the smoke, I needed damp material, and I had some damp jerky that hadn't dried completely after the rain. I tossed a few pieces onto the fire, and thick, white smoke rose, carried by the wind northeast along the course. The system activated a Class 1 signal fire and awarded Survival +5 and Communication +8 for the first signal. Communication was a new skill that hadn't existed in the system before, and its introduction changed the landscape of progress. I kept the signal going for 20 minutes and watched the horizon. The horizon was empty, which was expected, but not pleasant. Then I extinguished the excess smoke and kept the fire small, because the material for smoke was a limited resource. Signaling for 20 minutes every hour was a strategy I used in games, and it provided coverage without overuse. By noon, the hooks had brought in 3 fish, and one was large, about 1.5 pounds, so I put it on the fire. A large grilled fish was a meal of a different quality, and my body felt the difference between raw and cooked. The system showed a survival bonus of +2 for regular meals, and that was a small reward for following the right routine. After lunch, I tackled a task I had been putting off because it was complicated and required precise calculations. I needed a steering system because the sail provided speed, but steering with ropes was rough and imprecise. In the raft, the rudder was mounted at the stern and controlled the course regardless of the sail's position, and that was the right mechanism. I took a metal bracket and bent its sharp corner into the shape of a blade, using the edge of a board as a support. Bending metal by hand is slow and painful, and it took me 40 minutes and 3 attempts to get the right angle. The blade turned out to be about 20 centimeters wide, which was small but sufficient for an initial rudder. I secured it vertically to the stern of the raft through a hole in the board and fastened it with copper wire. I tied a steering rope to the blade and tested how it turned in the water. The resistance was just right. The system scored the craft a +7 and the construction a +5, and displayed a new parameter: course accuracy +40%. A +40% accuracy meant I could hold a northeast course without constantly making manual corrections. I set the rudder and released the sail ropes, and the raft went on its own, and I watched as the course held without intervention. 3 minutes without correction, and the deviation was only 5 degrees, which was better than I expected from a homemade rudder. The system updated the estimated time to land, and the new figure was 3.8 days at the current wind speed and precise course. 3.8 days is less than 4, and less than 4 is psychologically a different category than more than 4. I sent another signal at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, kept the smoke going for 20 minutes, and looked out at the horizon again. This time, the horizon wasn't completely empty. 11 kilometers to the west, there was something dark and elongated. The system reacted quickly and identified the object. The data appeared before I had a chance to focus my gaze. A cargo ship, approximately 180 meters long, heading southeast at a speed of about 14 knots, 11.2 kilometers away. 14 knots is 26 kilometers per hour, and the ship was moving across my course and moving away, not approaching. I immediately increased the smoke and threw everything wet that was at hand onto the fire, and the smoke rose in a column into the sky. I aimed the reflector directly at the ship and rotated it quickly to create a flashing signal rather than a steady one. A flashing signal attracts attention better because the human eye reacts to change rather than to constancy. The system counted down the seconds, and the ship continued on its course. The distance grew and reached 12.8 kilometers, then 13.4, then 14.1. And I realized they hadn't noticed me and accepted it as a fact, without anger or despair. I cleared away the excess smoke, kept the fire burning, and memorized the exact time and the ship's course as data for analysis. The data indicated that the trade routes lay west of my course, which meant I needed to adjust my course. Not drastically, but enough to stay closer to the trade routes and increase the likelihood of the next contact. I turned the wheel 15 degrees west, and the new course was north-northeast, with 291 kilometers to land. 10 kilometers of extra distance in exchange for proximity to the trade routes. It was a fair trade by any measure. The system agreed and showed a 23% increase in the probability of detection by a ship on the new course, and that was significant. The sun was setting, and I sat by the fire, thinking about the ship that had passed by, and the fact that the next one might not. The system closed out the seventh day and displayed the results, and the new skill, communication, stood at the top of the list as a new entry. Results: crafting 47, hunting 29, construction 46, survival 52, communication 13, and the level remained at 6 out of 10. It was 291 kilometers to land, and the fire burned low, the rudder held its course, and the raft moved through the darkness on its own, without my hand. At night, the ocean changed its character, and everyone who had spent more than a day at sea knew this. During the day, the ocean was a problem, and I solved it and controlled the variables, and that gave me a sense of control. At night, the ocean became something else, and the darkness swallowed the horizon, and the raft turned into a point without coordinates. The system worked, and the map was in my head, but a map is data, while darkness is a physical sensation of isolation. I wasn't afraid of the dark because fear of the dark is childish, and I had long since transformed it into a working tool. Darkness meant I couldn't see threats in advance, and that meant hearing and touch became paramount. I sat by a small fire, listening to the ocean, and learned to distinguish sounds just as I had learned to read the map in my head. A splash on the port side meant small fish, and a heavy thud from below meant either a wave or a large object beneath the raft. At 11 p.m., the system issued a warning, and the voice in my head was quieter than during the day, but clearer in the night's silence. The warning said there was a large object under the raft, estimated to weigh 200 kilograms. 200 kilograms isn't a fish or a piece of debris, so I grabbed my spear, lay on my stomach, and looked over the side into the darkness. The fire cast a faint glow on the water, and I could see the surface down to a depth of about a meter. Beyond that was darkness. The object wasn't attacking or moving quickly, and the system showed that it was following the raft at a distance of 2 meters. It wasn't patrolling or hunting, and that was an important distinction that changed my response tactics. I didn't attack blindly, because attacking a target in the dark without visual contact is a gamble. I lowered a piece of dried meat on a rope into the water and waited, and the object didn't react to the bait at all. Not reacting to the meat meant it was either not a predator or a well-fed predator, and both options lowered the threat level. I held my spear and waited, and the object continued to follow. At 1 o'clock in the morning, the system updated its identification. A green turtle, weighing approximately 180 kilograms, with a status of escort and a minimal threat level. I smiled quietly because in Raft, turtles were a source of rare materials, and the logic was the same here. They thought that nocturnal objects under the raft were always a threat, and they didn't know that sometimes it was just a neighbor. The turtle surfaced at 2 in the morning, and its head appeared half a meter from the side of the raft, staring at the fire. I looked at it, and it looked at me. This went on for a minute, and then it slowly disappeared into the depths. The system added a +2 to hunting for observation and identification, and that was fair for staying alert at night. After the turtle, the night was quiet, and I allowed myself to lie down and doze off with my hand on the spear, like an anchor for my consciousness. Dozing is not sleeping, and the difference is important because when you're dozing, you hear changes and react in seconds. At 4 in the morning, the change came, and I felt it before I heard it and jumped up before I realized what exactly it was. The wave was different. It wasn't coming from the west as usual, but from the north, and that meant a change in the weather system. The system confirmed it 3 seconds later. A front from the north, increasing wind speed, and a forecast for a Class 2 storm. Class 2 is more serious than Class 1, and I remembered that Class 1 had nearly torn the raft apart and cracked a plank. I began preparing immediately. The darkness was an obstacle, but my hands knew what to do without the help of my eyes. I took down the sail first, wrapped the polyethylene around the horizontal spar, and secured it tightly with a rope. Removing the sail means losing speed, but an intact raft is more important than speed in every scenario, without exception. I pulled the hooks out of the water and stowed them under the board because in a storm they would become dangerous pendulums on their ropes. I covered the fire pit with a container and weighed it down with a bracket, and the fire survived under the lid, barely smoldering. I moved all the supplies to the center of the raft and secured them with boards and ropes, turning them into a single, solid unit. The system credited me with +3 for construction and storm preparation, and added that there were 8 minutes until the start. I spent those 8 minutes on the last and most important task, securing myself to the raft. I took a nylon rope, wrapped it around my waist, and tied the other end to the central mast. The rope was 3 meters long, which gave me freedom of movement on the raft, but prevented me from being swept overboard into the waves. The storm hit exactly 8 minutes later, and the first gust struck the raft from the north, causing it to rise almost vertically. I fell to my knees and held on to the mast. The rope tightened and kept me from going overboard, and that was the right decision. The waves were 3 meters high, and they rolled completely over the raft. Water was everywhere, all the time. I wasn't standing or sitting. I was lying flat against the mast, holding on with both hands and waiting, because waiting was all I could do. The system was silent during the storm, and that was right, because data without the ability to act is just noise. The storm lasted 40 minutes, and during those 40 minutes, the raft nearly capsized 3 times and held steady 3 times. It held steady because the foam under the platform provided buoyancy, and because the center of gravity was low. After the storm, I lay on the wet planks, looked up at the brightening sky, and took stock of the losses. 1 hook was lost, a piece of shark skin had been washed away, and 400 milliliters of water had spilled from the bottle during the storm. But the raft was intact. The mast was standing. The fire was still burning. My supplies were in place, and I was alive. And that was more important than anything else. The system activated after the storm, and the voice sounded steady. The first thing it showed was the distance to land. The storm from the north had pushed the raft southwest, and over the course of the night and the storm, I had moved not forward, but backward by 19 kilometers. 291 kilometers became 310, and that was a loss of 2 days' progress, and I sat silently with that number for 30 seconds. Then I stood up, raised the sail, set the rudder, and the raft headed north-northeast, and I began to make up for the loss. The system wrapped up the night and the 8th day, and displayed the results without further ado, because the numbers spoke for themselves. Result: Craft 47, Hunting 31, Construction 49, Survival 61, Communication 13, and the level rose to 7 out of 10. 310 kilometers to land, the fire was burning, the sail was hoisted, and I looked toward the north-northeast without anger. The turtle returned in the morning, and I saw its head 5 meters off the starboard side an hour after dawn. It swam parallel to the raft and kept its distance, and this was behavior I had already classified as safe. The system identified it as the same individual and added a tag: repeat contact and neutral behavior. I watched it and thought about how 180 kilograms is a resource, and at the same time thought about how it had returned. Its return is no coincidence, and a non-coincidence requires analysis before action, because the data is important. Turtles don't follow rafts without a reason, and the reason was either the fire, the smell of fish, or the raft shadow. A raft shadow in the open ocean is a rarity, and small fish stay in the shade, and turtles hunt small fish. I smiled quietly because the raft was not just a raft, but already an ecosystem, and that changed the hunting strategy. If small fish stay under the raft, then hooks under the raft will yield more than hooks in open water. I moved 2 hooks under the raft onto shorter lines, and left the third one on the side as a control. The system awarded craft +2 for the tactical adjustment, and hunting +1 for applying observation and practice. In the first hour under the raft, the hooks yielded 4 fish, while the side hook yielded none, and the data confirmed the calculation. The turtle stayed nearby and hunted the same small fish that were fleeing from the hooks toward her. We were hunting together, and she didn't know it, but I did, and that was an asymmetry I gladly accepted. The system showed a hunting score of +6 for the morning session, and this was the best result of passive hunting over the entire trip. After the hunt, I got to work on repairs because the storm had left damage that couldn't be ignored for long. One rope on the side rail had snapped, and there was nothing to replace it with except redistributing the nylon from the spare spool. I cut off a meter of nylon, wove it into the side rail, pulled it tight, and tested it for braking strength, and it held up quite well. Then I inspected the platform boards, and 2 of them had shifted a centimeter after the storm, which required attention. I double-checked the foam under the platform. 1 piece had shifted, so I put it back in place and secured it with a rope. The system awarded me 4 points for construction, plus 4 for structural maintenance, and those were points for routine, not for a breakthrough. Routine is the foundation of survival, and everyone who played a long game and didn't save for later knew that. By noon, I sent a signal, and the smoke rose in a steady column, carried by the wind northwest toward the trade routes. The horizon was empty, and I kept the signal going for 20 minutes before taking it down, and this had become a familiar rhythm without disappointment. The turtle surfaced next to the raft and watched the smoke, and her gaze was ancient and calm and without judgment. I looked at her and thought about how she had weathered more storms in this ocean than I would likely live through in my lifetime. Then I thought about the practical side of things, and the practical reality was that a turtle shell is the best material for tableware. But the turtle was alive, and a living turtle hunting near the raft was worth more than a dead one with a shell. It was a calculation, not sentimentality, and the difference between calculation and sentimentality was fundamental. The system made no comment on my decision to spare the turtle and simply updated its tag to Class B Ally. Class B Ally is a new category that didn't exist in the system before, and its appearance was an interesting development. After noon, the wind picked up to 18 kilometers per hour, the sail filled nicely, and my speed increased to 3.8. 3.8 kilometers per hour was the best speed I'd had in days, and the system immediately recalculated the time to land. With the current wind and an accurate course, there were 3.1 days left to land, which was less than 3.5 days, and that was good. I adjusted the rudder with small movements and held a north-northeast course, and the turtle stayed close by, keeping pace. Turtles can swim up to 35 kilometers per hour in a burst, and 3.8 was a leisurely pace for her, requiring no effort. The system unlocked a new blueprint at level 7. The blueprint was called the Extended Raft, and required substantial materials. The Extended Raft required 8 planks, 4 floats, 2 masts, and a cross-rigging system. I didn't have 8 planks or 4 floats, which meant the design was a goal rather than an immediate task. A goal is a guide, and a guide is motivation, so I committed the design's requirements to memory as a list of gathering priorities. The next garbage patch, if I find one, I'll need to check for these exact materials first. In the evening, the turtle dove underwater and disappeared, and the system showed that it had gone down to a depth of 40 meters for a night hunt. I lit a fire and put the fish on it, and the smell of the roasting was sharp and just right again, and my stomach responded immediately. Over the course of the day, the hooks yielded a total of 9 fish, a record, and 3 of them were set aside to be dried. The food supply was enough for 5 days, which covered the estimated time to land with a margin, and that was the right balance. The system closed out the 9th day and displayed the results, and the numbers grew steadily without dips or spikes. Total: craft 51, hunting 41, construction 53, survival 68, communication 14, and the level remained at 7 out of 10. It was 271 kilometers to land, and the turtle was somewhere deep in the water. The fire was burning, and the raft was heading in the right direction on its own. The garbage island appeared on the horizon at 7 in the morning, and the system detected it before I saw it with my own eyes. The distance was 800 meters, and the system marked it as large, with an estimated area of 15 by 20 meters. 15 by 20 isn't a trash island, it's a warehouse. So I changed course immediately and steered the raft straight toward it. The turtle reacted to the change in course and veered off to the side, then returned and moved parallel to it again. The system began scanning at a distance of 400 meters, and the data appeared in my mind as we approached. Large wooden structures, metal elements, sheet plastic, ropes, and 3 barrels. I saw the barrels before anything else because they were bright orange and standing upright. Upright barrels meant there was something inside because an empty barrel would be lying on its side from the rocking of the water. I smiled quietly because 3 full barrels in the open ocean meant either fuel, water, or chemicals. They thought this junk was the end of someone's story, and they didn't know it was the beginning of my next chapter. The raft bumped against the edge of the island, and I secured it with a rope tied to a wooden beam and began a methodical inspection. The wooden structures were part of a wrecked boat, and the deck planks were thick, sturdy, and dry. I counted 12 planks suitable for use, and the design for the extended raft required 8 of them. 12 is more than 8, and the surplus is a reserve, and a reserve is safety, so I began selecting the best planks. The metal components included 2 mooring rings, a piece of rail about a meter long, and bolts with nuts. Bolts and nuts are rope-free connections, and rope-free connections provide a fundamentally different level of structural strength. The system revealed a bolted fastening scheme and marked it as an improvement over all current raft designs. The sheet plastic consisted of 2 pieces, each 1.5 meters long, and they were 3 times thicker than the polyethylene sheeting. Thick plastic meant a new canopy, a new sail, and a new water collection system all at once, and the choice was obvious. The ropes were synthetic and thick, and 3 coils, each 5 meters long, lay bound together. 15 meters of synthetic rope was a windfall that immediately changed all the calculations for the rigging strength. Then I got to the barrels. The first one was sealed and heavy, and I opened it with a bolt, using the ring as a lever. Inside was diesel fuel, and the smell was sharp and distinctive. I estimated the volume at 40 liters, and that was a fact, not an estimate. 40 liters of diesel fuel is not drinking water, but it is fuel, and fuel opens up possibilities that didn't exist before. The second barrel was lighter, and inside was fresh water. I checked the smell and color, and the water was clean. About 30 liters of clean, fresh water is a 10-day supply, and this changed all my survival calculations. The third barrel was the heaviest, and inside was a set of construction tools wrapped in oiled cloth. A hammer, a chisel, and a handsaw. And that was the moment when I stopped, and just held the saw in my hands in silence. The system issued a Class A event and added plus 15 to my crafting skill for the tool set, and that was a lot all at once. With the saw, I could cut wood precisely. With the hammer, I could drive in bolts. And with the chisel, I could make grooves. It was the difference between building with my bare hands and real construction, and the difference was absolute. I spent 3 hours transferring materials from the trash island to the raft, working without stopping and without rushing. Rushing while carrying heavy materials is an injury, and an injury while alone in the ocean is a slow death. After the transfer, I untied the raft and moved away from the island, then stood and looked at what lay on the planks around me. 12 planks, bolts, ropes, plastic, tools, 30 liters of water, and 40 liters of diesel fuel. The system recalculated the available schematics, and 7 new items appeared that hadn't been on the list before. A primitive engine made of diesel and metal, an extended raft with bolted fastenings, and a closed cabin. The closed cabin was a blueprint I hadn't expected to see, so I paused on it and read the requirements. The cabin required 6 planks, sheet plastic, and bolted fasteners, and provided protection against a Category 3 storm. A Category 3 storm is a serious storm, and protection against it represents a fundamentally different level of safety on the open ocean. I started building immediately because it was 271 kilometers to land, and 4 days meant many nights without a roof. The saw cut the wood precisely and smoothly, and the sound was mechanical and steady, and unfamiliar after days of silence. I cut the first 6 planks to size and assembled the cabin frame with bolts, and the hammer delivered crisp blows. The frame went up in 2 hours. It was sturdy and didn't wobble, and the system immediately credited me with a plus 12 for the construction. I cut the plastic and secured it to the frame as walls and a roof, and sealed the joints with strips of shark skin. The cabin was small, and inside there was only enough room to lie down, and that was all I needed, and all I asked of it. The system completed the scoring and showed a construction score of plus 18 for the cabin, which raised the overall construction score to 71 out of 100. 71 out of 100 was the threshold at which the system unlocked schematics that had previously been completely blocked. The new schematics included a navigation instrument, a twin sail system, and a primitive diesel engine. I put off the engine until tomorrow because the day was winding down, my strength was fading, and the cabin required a final inspection. I climbed inside and lay down. The ceiling was half a meter from my face, and the walls kept the wind out, and that was just right. A turtle surfaced nearby. Its head was level with the gunwale, and it gazed at the cabin with that same ancient calm. The system closed out the 10th day and displayed the results. The level had changed, and that was the top number on the list. Results: Craft 71, Hunting 41, Construction 71, Survival 74, Communication 14, and the level had risen to 8 out of 10. It was 258 kilometers to land, and I had a cabin, tools, and diesel fuel. And tomorrow there would be an engine. That was a fact. I woke up in the cabin, and the first thing I felt was the absence of wind on my face, and it was a new sensation. The walls worked and protected me, and my body had rested overnight, unlike on the open planks under the stars without shelter. The system showed the nightly report. The raft had traveled 31 kilometers, and there were 227 kilometers left to land without a motor. 227 was less than yesterday's 258, and the progress was real, but the motor could cut the remaining time in half. I stepped out of the cabin, and the turtle was still there, its head sticking out of the water 3 meters to starboard. The system displayed a diagram of a primitive motor, and I read the requirements methodically, like a technical specification before starting work. The motor required a metal casing, propeller blades, a fuel system, and an ignition system. I had a metal casing in the form of a bracket and a piece of rail, and this was a starting point, not a ready-made solution. I took a saw and started working on the rail because it was the strongest metal available on the raft. The metal saw cut slowly, and I cut the rail into sections, each of which gave me a blank for a blade. 4 blades, each 15 centimeters long, and I bent them with a hammer to a 30-degree angle relative to the plane of rotation. A 30-degree angle is the standard angle of attack for a low-power propeller, and I knew this from mechanical simulators. I made the shaft from a long bolt and secured the blades to the shaft through holes drilled with a chisel and a hammer. Drilling with a chisel is slow and imprecise, but the metal was soft, and I drilled 4 holes in an hour of work. The system scored the craft a +8 for the propeller, and showed that the design's efficiency was 55%. 55% efficiency isn't the maximum, but it's enough for movement, and movement was the goal, not perfection. The fuel system was more complicated because diesel fuel required a supply and control mechanism, and a simple hole wouldn't work. I took a plastic bottle and cut a small hole in the cap with a chisel, about 2 millimeters in diameter. 2 millimeters provided a drip feed, and a drip feed is a primitive carburetor with no moving parts. I secured the bottle upside down above the motor housing, and the diesel began to drip directly onto the ignition point. I made the ignition from a flint and a piece of copper wire bent into a loop above the fuel feed point. The first start didn't work. The diesel dripped, but the spark didn't ignite the mixture, so I stopped and thought. The problem was the fuel-air ratio. The drop was too large for a single spark given that volume. I reduced the hole in the cap to 1 millimeter by plugging it with a shark tooth, leaving only the edge exposed. The second attempt produced a flash, and the engine jerked. The blades turned twice and stalled, but that was a start. The system awarded a +5 craft bonus for the start, and added a message stating that the air supply system required refinement. The air supply was all that separated a flash from sustained combustion, and I worked on it for the next 2 hours. I drilled 4 holes in the sides of the engine casing, and they provided airflow to the combustion point. The third start was different. The engine caught, the blades began to rotate, and the sound was uneven, but real. The sound of the motor on the open ocean was the most mechanical sound I had heard in 11 days, and that was just right. The system showed the speed, and the raft was moving at 2.1 kilometers per hour on the motor alone, without the sail, and that was the baseline result. The sail plus the motor gave a combined speed of 5.3 kilometers per hour, and that was a new top speed ever recorded. 5.3 kilometers per hour over 227 kilometers meant 42 hours of travel, and 42 hours is less than 2 days, and that was realistic. I smiled quietly, because 2 days ago I had a raft made of planks and a rusty rod, and now I had a motor. They thought the ocean was a death sentence, and they didn't know that the ocean is simply a problem with enough variables. There were 40 liters of diesel, and at the current consumption rate, which I estimated at 2 liters per hour, it was enough for 20 hours of engine time. 20 hours of motor time plus the sail plus drifting would cover the entire distance with a margin, and the calculation was accurate. I didn't run the motor continuously because continuous operation of a primitive motor leads to wear and failure. The schedule was simple. The motor ran for 2 hours and rested for 1, and during that time the raft moved solely under sail. The system approved the plan, factored in the engine's capacity, and projected a service life of 35 to 40 hours of operation. 35 hours on a 2-on-1 schedule provided real coverage of the route, and this was a plan backed by the numbers. The turtle fell behind when the speed increased, then caught up and stayed in the wake, and it was unexpectedly touching. The system updated the map and the landmass became larger and more distinct, with details appearing that hadn't been there before. The landmass was an island, and the system estimated the island's size at 40 square kilometers. It was a small island. A small island isn't a continent, but it has fresh water, trees, and soil, and that was enough for the next stage. The next stage lay beyond the horizon, and the raft was heading toward it at a speed of 5.3 kilometers per hour, with the motor running smoothly. The system closed out the 11th day and displayed the results. The level number stood as a question to which there was an answer. Result: Craft 84, Hunting 41, Construction 71, Survival 79, Communication 14, and the level rose to 9 out of 10. 184 kilometers to land. The engine was running, the sail was hoisted, the turtle was following behind, and an island lay ahead. The island appeared on the horizon at 4 in the morning, and I hadn't been sleeping because the system woke me up an hour before dawn. The signal was quiet and precise, and a voice said that the distance to land had shrunk to 12 kilometers and visual contact was possible. I stepped out of the cabin and looked north, and at first I saw nothing but the dark sky above the dark water. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw a strip that was darker than the sky and the horizon, and it wasn't moving like a wave. A stationary dark strip in the ocean is always land, and I stood there looking at it in silence for about a minute. The system confirmed visual contact and added plus 10 survival points for reaching an intermediate goal. Intermediate because the island wasn't the final destination, and the system knew it, and I knew it, and neither of us made a big deal out of it. I started the engine and set the rudder due north. The sail caught the morning breeze and the raft moved steadily forward. The turtle was nearby, and it too turned north, as if it knew where we were going and had made that decision itself. Over the course of 3 hours, the island grew from a strip into a silhouette, and then details began to appear, one after another. Trees were the first thing I made out, and they were tall, which meant the soil was deep enough. The system scanned the island as we went, and the data was fed into my mind as we approached, without stopping. The area is 43 square kilometers, with a maximum elevation of 280 meters. The vegetation is dense, and the coastline is complex. The complex coastline meant reefs, rocks, and shallow waters, and it was impossible to approach directly from the north. I slowed down and began circling the island clockwise, looking for a safe entry point, with the system assisting me with data. The northern shore was rocky, and the waves crashed against the rocks with a force that would have smashed the raft in a minute. The eastern shore was better. There was a strip of sand about 50 meters wide, and the depth near the shore was sufficient. The system showed that the depth off the eastern shore was 2 meters at a distance of 30 meters from the sand, and that was acceptable. I approached from the east, took down the sail, switched to the motor, and steered the raft slowly and precisely straight toward the sandbar. The motor ran quietly, and the turtle fell behind at the edge of the shallows, stopping to watch the raft approach the shore. 20 meters from the shore, the raft's keel touched the bottom, and the raft stopped. So I turned off the motor and jumped into the water. The water was knee-deep and warm, and the bottom was firm, so I pulled the raft toward the shore, and it moved easily through the shallow water. The bow of the raft dug into the sand and stopped, and I stood in the shallow water looking at the shore. And the shore was real. Not a horizon or a mark on a map, but real sand, real trees, and real land just 2 meters away from me. I stepped onto the shore and took my first step on the sand, and my feet felt the solid surface without any rocking. And it felt strange. 12 days on the water had made solid ground feel unfamiliar, and my body adjusted to the new balance for about 30 seconds. The system recorded survival plus 15 and communication plus 5, and added a message that I read twice. The message said that level 10 had been reached, and the system was switching to extended island scanning mode. Level 10 was the maximum of the first phase, and the system made that clear, adding that the second phase was beginning. The second phase was called Exploration, and it had its own levels, its own schemes, and its own rules, and that was correct. I didn't read all the new schemes right away because first I needed to understand what this island was all about. The exploration began at the shore, and I walked along the sand, looking at the trees. A mix of palm trees and deciduous trees. Palm trees meant coconuts, and coconuts meant water and calories and material for weaving, and that was a good start. The system identified the tree species and added that among the deciduous trees, there were hardwoods suitable for construction. Hardwood, plus the tools I already had, meant construction on a different scale than on the raft. I walked 200 meters along the shore and found a stream that emerged from the forest and flowed into the sea between two rocks. The stream was narrow, about half a meter wide, but the water was clear and cold, and I tasted it. It was fresh. Fresh running water was a resource that, by itself, met the island's most critical need. The system awarded +8 for the exploration for discovering the water source and added the new exploration skill to the list. Research was the third new skill after communication, and that meant the second phase operated under different rules. I returned to the raft, pulled it further ashore, and secured it with a rope to a palm tree above the high tide line. The raft was mine, and I wasn't going to lose it, because a raft with a motor and tools is an asset, not a thing of the past. The turtle was still standing in the shallows at the edge of the reef, looking at the shore, and I looked back at her. She couldn't come ashore, and I couldn't explain to her that it was normal, so we just looked at each other. Then she turned and swam out into the deep, and the system removed the Class B ally marker from active contacts. I watched her go, and felt nothing out of the ordinary because the calculation was simple, and it was correct. She was part of the ocean phase, and the ocean phase had ended, and everyone moved on to their next phase. The sun had risen high, and the island surrounded me, and the system displayed a map of the island that was filling in. The map was 90% empty, and that meant exploration, construction, and hunting lay ahead under new conditions. I stood on the shore and looked at the forest, thinking about how the raft had been my bed, kitchen, and workshop in the ocean. Now I had an entire island, tools, a motor, and the experience of 12 days that hadn't gone anywhere. The system closed out the 12th day and displayed the final results of the first phase, and the numbers stood as the result of my work. Results of the first phase: craft 91, hunting 44, construction 78, survival 91, communication 19, and exploration 8. Level 10 out of 10, and the second phase was open. The island was waiting. I was ready, and that was enough to begin.